The first thing Ethan Brooks noticed about Redmond High School was how meticulously everything was arranged. Not just clean, but unnaturally polished. The glass windows reflected the world too perfectly. The floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the hallways stretched out, too orderly for a place full of teenagers. It wasn't like his old school in Birmingham, Alabama, where the walls were covered with vibrant student murals and you could hear rap music and beatboxing in the hallways, sounds of a culture that lived in the air. Redmond High felt sterile, controlled. His mom had called the move a fresh start, but Ethan could already tell that this fresh start wasn't for him, it was for them. His dad, always more direct, had called it a necessary change. Ethan wasn't sure what to call it yet, but the moment he stepped through those front doors, he could feel it. People were looking, not staring, that would be too obvious, but the quick glances, the barely whispered comments, the way some students eyed him from head to toe before quickly looking away, the way they evaluated him based on his appearance, the way they knew exactly who he was without a word spoken. It all said the same thing. Who's this guy, and why is he here? Ethan wasn't small for a 16-year-old. At 5'10", he had the kind of build that came from years of disciplined training, not just working out, but controlled muscle. He moved with the quiet confidence his dad had drilled into him, steps measured, posture straight, never slouching. Yet, to them, he must have looked like an outsider, because he was. His black skin, his southern roots, his presence, none of it belonged here. Not in a place where the wealthy kids strutted around like royalty, where the athletes dominated and the others just knew their place. Ethan wasn't sure if he had one. He made it to the front office without incident, collecting his schedule from the overly polite receptionist. As he walked out, a group of students near the lockers caught his attention. A tall, broad-shouldered guy with perfectly styled blonde hair leaned against the lockers, flanked by two others who laughed at something he had just said. Their laughter wasn't loud. It was deliberate, meant to be heard just enough to make sure the target knew they were the joke. Ethan wasn't the target yet, but he could feel it. The quiet snickers, the glances, the calculated judgment. The blonde guy, Tyler Grant, according to the class roster, gave him a look that wasn't exactly hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was the kind of look someone gave when they were deciding whether or not to make trouble out of you. When they look at you and wonder, is this kid going to be easy to put in his place? Tyler smirked, leaned toward one of his friends, and muttered something just low enough for Ethan to not hear. The two others chuckled, looking at him a little too long, the way they observed him. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose and walked past them, ignoring it. His dad's voice echoed in his head. Strength isn't about showing off. It's about knowing when to walk away. But the thing about guys like Tyler is, they don't like being ignored, especially when you're the one they've already decided they want to break. It was lunch period on Friday. Ethan Brooks had just sat down with his tray, minding his own business, when a shadow fell over his table. Tyler Grant, with his entourage, Zach and Brandon, stood behind him. Tyler grinned loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. He said, "Man, I've been wondering, how come you don't talk much, Brooks? What, cat got your tongue?" Ethan didn't respond. He took a bite of his food, chewing slowly. That answer wasn't good enough. Tyler grabbed the apple off Ethan's tray and tossed it across the cafeteria. It landed with a dull thud near the drink station. A few heads turned, students waiting to see what would happen next. Ethan set his fork down carefully, deliberately. He looked at Tyler, meeting his eyes for the first time all week. Tyler smiled, mistaking Ethan's silence for fear. And that's when he made his biggest mistake. He shoved Ethan's shoulder hard, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Come on, Brooks, do something." Ethan inhaled deeply, his muscles already coiled, controlled. This time, he didn't walk away. The cafeteria froze. Conversations cut short, the sound of plastic trays scraping against tables stopped. Even the lunch staff behind the counter paused, watching from a distance. Tyler Grant had just shoved Ethan Brooks in front of everyone, and now everyone was waiting to see what he'd do. Ethan sat still for a moment, his mind already calculating. His father's words rang in his head. You don't fight with anger, you fight with control. Slowly, he pushed his chair back and stood up. No rush, no panic. His movements were precise, effortless, like a man stretching before a workout. Tyler's smirk widened. "Oh, we got a tough guy," he said, looking at his friends. "You gonna swing, Brooks? You gonna act like a thug now?" Ethan's expression didn't change. He just tilted his head slightly, examining Tyler like he was an equation that didn't quite add up. That was the moment Tyler realized something was off. Ethan wasn't nervous. He wasn't flinching. He wasn't even blinking. The grin on Tyler's face faltered just a fraction. A hesitation, a slight shift in his weight, like some primal instinct was warning him that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a mistake. But it was already too late. Tyler reached out, shoving Ethan again. This time Ethan moved fast. Before Tyler's hands could fully extend, Ethan's left hand shot up, gripping Tyler's wrist in one smooth motion. His right hand came up next, lightning quick, clamping onto Tyler's elbow. Then, with zero effort, Ethan pivoted slightly, using Tyler's own momentum against him. Tyler's feet left the ground, his back slammed onto the cafeteria floor before he even knew what had happened. A sharp, stunned silence filled the room. Tyler gasped, genuinely shocked, his body sprawled on the tile. He scrambled to sit up, eyes wide, confused. His friends took a step forward, but Ethan didn't even look at them. Instead, he crouched down next to Tyler, his voice low. "Don't touch me again," he said. "No threats, no insults, just a statement." And that's what made it worse. Tyler wasn't just beaten, he was dismissed. Ethan stood up, dusted off his hands like he had just moved a chair instead of a person, and picked up his tray. He didn't even look back as he walked away. The cafeteria was still dead silent. Students stared at Tyler, at Ethan, at each other. Then, somewhere in the back, a single voice whispered, "Holy shh." And just like that, the floodgates opened. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into excited conversations. Someone had caught the whole thing on their phone. Someone else was already texting about it. And Tyler? He stayed sitting there on the floor, his jaw clenched, his hands curled into tight white-knuckled fists, because he knew by the time the last bell rang, everyone in Redmond High would be talking about what just happened. But this wasn't over. By the time the final bell rang, the story had already spread across Redmond High like wildfire. Ethan Brooks had dropped Tyler Grant in the cafeteria, not with a punch, not with some wild brawl, but with one clean, effortless move. And that's what made it so impossible to ignore. If Ethan had thrown hands, if there had been a messy fight, it would have been different. It would have been just another school scuffle. Kids would pick sides, rumors would twist the details, and eventually it would fade. But this was something else. Ethan had made Tyler look weak. He had made him look helpless. And in a place like Redmond High, where power and dominance were everything, that wasn't something people forgot. Ethan walked out of the school building, ignoring the stares. Some kids watched him like they were seeing him for the first time. Others whispered. The moment his back was turned, a few just looked outright nervous. Tyler wasn't waiting outside, that would have been too obvious. But Ethan wasn't stupid. He knew how this worked. Guys like Tyler didn't take embarrassment lightly. They didn't just get up, dust themselves off, and move on. They waited, they plotted, they made sure that when they got their revenge, it was worth it. Ethan Brooks had seen it before, and he knew this wasn't over. At home, he barely made it through dinner before his mom noticed. She had that way of looking at him, that way of tilting her head slightly, like she was scanning his face for hidden details. "Everything okay at school?" she asked, setting down her fork. His dad, sitting across from him, glanced up too. Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, just a regular day." His mom didn't buy it, his dad just kept eating. That was the difference between them. His mom asked questions, his dad waited for answers. Later that night, Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Unknowing you think you're tough. You got lucky today. Unknown, watch your back. Ethan stared at the screen, then exhaled, locked his phone, and set it face down on his desk. This wasn't unexpected, it wasn't even surprising, but now he had a choice to make. Would he let this go, pretend it never happened, or would he make sure Tyler and everyone else understood exactly who he was? Because whatever happened next, it was coming. Monday morning. Everything felt different. Ethan could tell before he even stepped inside. The sideways glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when he walked past. It was all the confirmation he needed. The story had officially grown legs. By the time he reached his locker, 2 freshmen had already darted out of his way. A junior he didn't even know gave him an approving nod. And then they were the ones who suddenly wanted to be his friend. Yo, Brooks, you really put Grant on his ass, huh? Dude, I heard you barely even touched him. He just dropped like a sack of bricks. Bro, you got hands like that and you don't even talk? That's cold, man. Ethan ignored most of it, giving nothing more than a glance or a short nod. Because this wasn't respect. This was entertainment. They weren't looking at him like a person. They were looking at him like a spectacle, a rumor come to life. And that's when he saw Tyler Grant standing by his usual spot near the main entrance. But something had changed. The usual cocky smirk was gone. The easy confidence was missing. Instead, Tyler stood stiff, his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't alone. Zach and Brandon flanked him just like always, but now they weren't laughing. Tyler met Ethan's gaze for half a second, then he looked away. Ethan almost smirked. Almost. But he knew better than to think Tyler had given up. Guys like him didn't just accept a loss, they waited for a rematch. Lunch was worse. Ethan could feel it before he even sat down. The air was thick with expectation. People watched him like they were waiting for something to happen, like they thought Tyler might storm across the cafeteria for a round 2, but Tyler wasn't even in the room. His usual table was empty. Ethan had just started eating when someone sat across from him. Not one of Tyler's guys, a girl. Ava Sinclair. She wasn't someone he had spoken to before, but he knew who she was. Smart, confident, never the type to follow the crowd. She set her drink down and studied him for a second, then she said, "You know, you didn't just beat Tyler, you humiliated him." Ethan took a bite of his food, chewed, swallowed, and then he picked the fight. Ava smirked. "Yeah, but you ended it. That's worse for him." Ethan didn't respond. She leaned forward slightly. "Look, just be careful. Tyler's dad is on the school board. You think he's going to let this slide?" Entity. Ethan met her gaze, steady, unfazed. Ethan met her gaze, steady, unfailing. "Let them hope. This'll get better, 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 better. There's always better." Ava exhaled, shaking her head. "You should." She stood up, picking up her tray. "Just watch your back." She walked away, and for the first time since Friday, Ethan felt something he hadn't before. Not anger, not annoyance, curiosity. Because whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be another cafeteria fight. By Wednesday, the energy at Redmond High had shifted again. Tyler Grant wasn't just avoiding Ethan, he was actively erasing him. No more comments, no more smug glances, no more games, nothing. For some guys, that would have been enough. Ethan had won. Wasn't that the point? But something still felt off. And that feeling only grew stronger when Ava found him after last period. She didn't waste time. "Tyler's dad is trying to get you expelled." Ethan Brooks barely reacted. Ava scoffed. "If they don't need a reason, he's claiming you attacked Tyler, that it was unprovoked. He's pulling strings to make it stick." Ethan wasn't surprised. He'd seen this play out before. Different place, same script. A white kid starts something, a black kid finishes it. Suddenly, the rules don't apply the same way. He ran a hand over his face, inhaling slowly. "So what do I do?" Ava hesitated, then said, "Fight back. Not with fists, with proof." That night, Ethan got to work. By morning, he had everything he needed. Screenshots of texts, footage of the cafeteria fight, the full clip, not just the takedown, and witnesses who were willing to back him up. When he walked into school, he wasn't alone. Ava was with him, and so were two other students, kids he barely knew before all this, but they knew the truth. And that was enough. They marched straight to the principal's office, and by the time the meeting ended, Tyler's dad didn't get what he wanted. Ethan wasn't expelled, he wasn't suspended, nothing stuck. Because the truth wasn't just on his side. It was undeniable. Tyler Grant didn't come back to school for the rest of the week. When he finally returned, he wasn't the same. Quieter, less confident. He kept his head down, his voice lower. He wasn't afraid of Ethan, but he understood. Ethan hadn't just beaten him in a fight, he had beaten him where it really mattered. And that's what people remembered. Ethan never asked for respect, he never asked for attention, he just wanted to exist, without being tested, without being challenged, without having to prove himself over and over again. But the reality is, some people only learn through consequences, and when you finally show them what you're capable of, they never forget. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about throwing a punch, it's about making sure the truth is louder than the lies.